Do it my way, or leave. Victoria Hayes hurled the words across the boardroom like a fist, and Ethan Carter, the widowed single dad, the maintenance man. They all looked down on, stood up, closed his laptop, and walked out without one word back. They laughed, called him proud, said a man with a kid and bills would come crawling back by Friday. 3 days later, the whole company was on its knees begging for him, and the reason why nearly destroyed everything. Before we start, tell me the city you're watching from in the comments, so I can see how far this story travels tonight. And if you believe a quiet man's word should still mean something in this world, subscribe and follow the channel. Because what this maintenance man was really hiding will leave you speechless. Do it my way, or leave. The words hit the boardroom and stopped every breath in it. Victoria Hayes stood at the head of the long glass table, both hands flat on the surface, leaning into the silence she'd just made. 11 executives sat frozen. 2 assistants pressed against the back wall stopped typing. And 40 feet down at the far end of that table, Ethan Carter didn't move at all. He was 58 years old, silver at the temples, calloused at the hands, in a plain gray shirt, with the company logo stitched over the pocket. He'd said maybe 30 words in the entire meeting. Now he said none. He just reached down and closed his laptop. Carter. Victoria's voice sharpened. I asked you a question. Ethan unplugged the cable from the port, wound it around his hand in 3 slow loops, slid the laptop into a worn leather bag that was older than half the people in the room. Carter, I am speaking to you. He stood. That got them. Somebody's chair creaked. Marcus Bell, the chief operating officer. 42, expensive suit, expensive teeth, leaned back with a thin smile, the smile of a man watching exactly what he'd hoped to see. Ethan pushed his chair in, gently, the way a polite man does even in the middle of an earthquake. You said do it your way or leave. He nodded once, almost kind. So I'm leaving. You walk out that door, Victoria said, and you don't have a job to come back to. I know how it works, ma'am. He turned and walked, and nobody in that room stopped him because not one of them believed he'd actually go. The door clicked shut. For a second, silence. Then Marcus Bell laughed. Well, he spread his hands. There goes the drama. He'll be back Monday, hat in hand. Guy's a single dad. He can't afford principals. A ripple of quiet laughter moved around the table. Now, can we please get back to the acquisition timeline? Victoria didn't laugh. She stared at the door where Ethan Carter had just disappeared, and something cold moved through her chest. A feeling she couldn't name, yet the feeling of a person who has just done something they can't undo. Yes, she said finally, tearing her eyes away. The timeline. 2 floors down on the plant floor, where the actual company lived, Ethan pulled his badge over his head. Whoa, whoa! A big man in coveralls straightened up from a control panel. Danny Ruiz, floor supervisor, 30 years on the line, a handshake like a car compactor. Ethan, why do you look like that? What happened upstairs? I got told to do it her way or leave. And I left. Ethan set the badge down on the workbench between them. Danny stared at it like Ethan had set down a live grenade. You quit. You, Ethan, you got a kid at home. That's why I quit, Danny. Talk to me. They want to skip the pressure test cycle on line 4, run it hot at acquisition tempo, hit the merger date. Ethan's jaw tightened. I told them the number 3 seals aren't rated for it. I told them if we push that line without recalibrating, we get a rupture. Not maybe, inside a month. I told them 3 times in 3 meetings in writing. And she stood up in front of the whole board and told me fall in line or walk. Ethan almost smiled. So I walked. Danny's face went the color of wet cement. Nobody else knows that recalibration sequence. You built it custom. It's not even in the standard docs. I know. They can't run line 4 safe without you. They can run it. Ethan picked up his bag. They just shouldn't. He looked around the floor one last time, the machines he'd rebuilt with his own 2 hands, the men he'd worked beside for 17 years, and his throat pulled tight. Keep them safe if you can, Danny. Somebody has to. He walked to the exit. And this time, nobody laughed, because down on the floor, every man there knew exactly what had just left the building. The house Ethan came home to was small. 2 bedrooms, a leaning porch, a mailbox he kept meaning to repaint. He barely got the door open before a purple blur came flying down the hall and slammed into his legs. "Daddy, you're home early." "You're home." He caught her and lifted her up. 8 years old and getting almost too big for it, but he'd been lifting Maddie since she was 3, and he wasn't ready to stop. She had her mother's eyes. That was the thing that could still 5 years later reach into his chest and squeeze without warning. "Hey, Maddie Bug." She pulled back and studied his face the way she studied everything hard and honest. "You're doing the sad mouth." "I don't have a sad mouth." "You do. It goes flat, like a line." She pressed her finger to his cheek. "What happened?" He carried her to the kitchen and set her on the counter, and then he made a decision. The night after Sarah's funeral, he'd promised himself he'd never lie to his daughter about anything that mattered. He'd broken a lot of things in his life. He would never break that. "Maddie, I need to tell you something. Listen like a big girl." She folded her hands. So serious it nearly killed him. "I don't have my job anymore." Her eyes went round. "Did you get fired?" "Not exactly. My boss asked me to do something that wasn't safe, something that could get people hurt. I said no. She said if I wouldn't do it, I had to leave, so I left." Maddie chewed on that. Then she asked the only question that mattered. Was it the right thing leaving? Ethan looked at his daughter, 8 years old, cutting straight to the heart of it, and the last knot of doubt in his chest came loose. "Yeah, baby," he said quietly. "I think it was." "Then it's fine." She kicked her heels against the cabinet. "We can eat cereal for dinner. I don't even mind cereal." He had to turn to the stove so she wouldn't see his eyes. "We're not there yet, Bug. Grilled cheese. Corners cut off, corners cut off." Deal. That night after Maddie was asleep, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a coffee going cold and did the math. 17 years of savings. A pension he couldn't touch for a decade. Sarah's life insurance, most of it eaten by the medical bills the insurance company had fought him on for 2 years while she was dying. 4 months of runway. 5 if he was careful. And Maddie needed new shoes, and there was a field trip slip on the fridge with a fee attached, and the truck outside was making a sound he didn't like. A smarter man would have been afraid. But every time the fear rose, he heard Victoria Hayes do it my way, or leave, and he saw Line 4 running hot with 200 men standing next to it, while somebody upstairs counted down to a payday, and the fear turned into something harder and cleaner than fear. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't know. "Ethan, this is Karen in HR. Please don't do anything rash." Ms. Hayes spoke in the heat of the moment. "Come in tomorrow, and we'll process a formal write-up and move past this. The company values you." He read it twice. Typed back one line. "The company had 17 years to value me. Good night, Karen." He set the phone face down. He did not go in the next morning. At Halstead Manufacturing, the next morning started bad and got worse fast. Victoria Hayes was at her desk by 7 because she hadn't slept. Prescott Industrial was buying Halstead for $1.2 billion, contingent on hitting production targets and passing a final operational audit, 11 days out. Every department straining. Every hour a knife. At 7:20, Marcus Bell filled her doorway, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. "We've got a problem on line 4. "Then fix it. The calibration logs are locked. When a technician leaves the system, auto revokes his safety credentials, and Carter's the only one with, so reissue them to someone else." Nobody else knows the sequence. Carter built the recalibration custom years ago. It's not documented. Victoria looked up. Nobody builds a critical safety system that only one man understands. Marcus shrugged too smooth. Halstead did. Half the things that work around here work because Carter kept them working. He never made noise about it. He just did it. She studied him. And there, for just a second, she caught something in his face. A flicker. Gone before she could name it. But she was too tired, too squeezed by the clock to chase it. Then get him back. Offer his job. Offer a raise. I don't care. HER reached out last night. He said no. Offer more. Victoria. Marcus lowered his voice into something that sounded almost like concern. He's a maintenance tech with a chip on his shoulder and a martyr complex. Let me handle it internally. We don't need him. I'll run line 4 on the standard cycle. We hit the date the deal closes, and this whole thing's a footnote. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to, because he was handing her the one thing she needed most, a way to make the problem vanish without slowing down. Fine, she said. Handle it. It was the second worst decision she'd make that week. 3 days after Ethan Carter walked out, line 4 failed. Not all at once, not yet. But the number 3 coolant seal, the exact part Ethan had named in 3 meetings, began to weep a thin hiss of pressurized vapor that a floor tech named Bobby only caught because he walked past with a coffee and heard something that didn't sound right. Danny Ruiz shut the whole line down in 90 seconds. His hands were shaking when he did it. By noon, 2 more systems threw warnings. A backup that failed to engage. A sensor array spitting garbage data, each one small on its own. Together, they told a story the floor understood, and the top floor didn't want to hear. The machine was coming apart, and the man who'd held it together for 17 years was home cutting the corners off a sandwich. So Danny did something he'd never done in 30 years. He went upstairs. He stood in the doorway of Victoria Hayes' office in his coveralls, didn't wait to be invited, and didn't sit down. Ma'am, Danny Ruiz, floor supervisor. You need to hear this from somebody who was standing there. I'm in the middle of that man you ran off. Ethan Carter. Danny's voice didn't rise, but it didn't bend either. He told you line 4 was going to fail. He told you the exact part. This morning that exact part started failing. I shut the line down myself. Another 20 minutes and we've got a rupture with 40 men next to it. The office went dead quiet. I don't know what happened in your meeting. Danny went on quieter now. But in 17 years, that man never raised his voice, never asked for credit, and was never once wrong about that floor. Not once. And you told him to fall in line or walk. He shook his head slow. You tested the wrong man, ma'am. I say that with respect. But you did. He nodded once, turned, and walked out. And for the second time that week, a quiet man from the plant floor left Victoria Hayes sitting in silence. That evening, Victoria did something she almost never did. She stayed after everyone left, and instead of working, she pulled Ethan Carter's personnel file. 17 years. Not one disciplinary note. Instead, page after page of the opposite commendations quietly filed and never acted on. Incident reports where his fast hands had stopped a shutdown before it started. And again, safety memos. Formal. Dated. Signed. Submitted through every proper channel. The first was 4 months old. Recommend full recalibration of line 4 seals before increasing tempo. Current seals rated for standard load only. Submitted. Marked, reviewed, filed. Nothing done. The second 2 months old, more urgent. The third 3 weeks old, almost pleading in its flat, plain way. This is the third time I am raising this. If we run line 4 at acquisition tempo without recalibration, I believe we are risking a serious injury event. I am putting this in writing so there is no confusion later about whether the risk was known. Victoria read that line 4 times. He'd known. Not just about the seal, he'd known about them. He'd known they might bury his warning, run the line, and if it blew, stand up and swear nobody could have seen it coming. So in his quiet, methodical way, he'd made sure the record would say otherwise. He hadn't been protecting himself. He'd been protecting the truth. She scrolled to see who'd received and reviewed all 3 memos. The same name sat on every one. Marcus Bell, Victoria sat back slowly. That flicker she'd caught in Marcus's face, the thing she'd been too tired to chase, came back to her now, and this time, it didn't look like concern. It looked like a man steering her carefully away from the one person who could contradict him. She reached for her phone. Almost called Marcus. Stopped. Then she scrolled to a name she hadn't dialed in 5 years. Her father's old attorney executor of the Halstead estate, the one man alive who'd known Raymond Halstead's business better than Raymond himself. He answered on the second ring. "Victoria, it's late. Everything all right? I need to ask you something about the ownership of this company, and I need you to be completely honest because I think I've made a terrible mistake." A pause on the line, then carefully. "Does this have anything to do with a man named Ethan Carter?" Her hand tightened around the phone. "Why would you ask me that?" "Because your father left instructions," the old lawyer said slowly. "And I have been waiting 5 years for someone at that company to ask me the right question." Across town, Ethan had no idea any of this was happening. He was on his living room floor helping Maddie build a solar system out of a shoebox and painted ping-pong balls, losing an argument about Pluto. "It's a planet." She glued a tiny gray ball into place. "It's a dwarf planet bug." "That's still a planet. It's just small." She sat back and looked at him dead serious. "Small things still count, Daddy." Ethan looked at his daughter hair in her face, defending the smallest, most overlooked thing in the whole solar system, and had to clear his throat before he could answer. "Yeah," he said. "You're right. Small things still count." His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost let it go. For a reason he could never afterward explain, he answered. "Mr. Carter." A woman's voice. Older. Precise. "My name is Eleanor Voss. I'm an attorney. I represented Raymond Halstead for 30 years, and I'm the executor of his estate. I've been trying to reach you." A breath. "Mr. Carter, I think you should sit down. There's something Raymond arranged before he died. Something he wanted you to know, and I'm afraid it's going to change your understanding of everything that's happened this week." Ethan looked at Maddie gluing Pluto into the sky, at the cold coffee on the table, at the field trip slip on the fridge, and the truck outside that was making a sound he didn't like. "I'm sitting," he said. "Go ahead." "Raymond didn't think of you as a technician, Mr. Carter. He said so to me more than once. He said you were the only honest man left in that building." A pause. "Which is why 4 years before he died, he made an arrangement. And it has your name on it." Ethan's grip went still on the phone. In the next room, Maddie hummed to herself, hanging planets in the dark. "What kind of arrangement?" he said quietly. And on the other end of the line, Eleanor Voss told him. "An ownership stake." Eleanor Voss said the 3 words like she was setting something heavy on a table between them, and Ethan Carter didn't move. In the next room, Maddie hummed to herself, gluing the last planet into the dark of a shoebox, and Ethan sat at his kitchen table with a phone pressed to his ear and a cold cup of coffee in front of him, and felt the whole floor of his life tilt 3 degrees to the left. "I'm sorry," he said. "Say that again." 4 years before he died, Eleanor said Raymond Halstead transferred a block of shares into an irrevocable trust. "The beneficiary is you, Mr. Carter. It has been sitting there quietly for 8 years. You currently hold a 12% ownership stake in Halstead Manufacturing." Ethan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. 12%. Eleanor repeated gently, because she'd told a lot of people a lot of surprising things over 30 years, and she knew the sound of a man who'd stopped breathing. By the terms of the current acquisition, that stake would be worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $140 million. The number didn't mean anything. That was the strange part. Ethan heard it the way you hear a word in a foreign language. The sounds arrived, but they didn't attach to anything. $140 million. He looked at the field trip permission slip on the fridge with its $11 fee, and the 2 numbers refused to exist in the same universe. "That's not possible," he said finally. "It's not only possible, Mr. Carter, it's notarized, filed, and legally airtight." Raymond was very careful. He was always very careful about the things he cared about. A pause. "And he cared about you." Ethan closed his eyes. He could see the old man thermos of black coffee walking the floor at 6 in the morning, stopping to ask about a man's kid by name. Raymond Halstead had been dead 5 years, and Ethan still sometimes turned to say something to him before remembering he was gone. "Why?" Ethan said. His voice came out rough. "Why would he do that and never tell me?" "Because he knew you," Eleanor said simply. "He told me. I remember it exactly. He said if I tell Ethan, he'll refuse it. He'll say he didn't earn it. So don't tell him. Let him find out when it matters." She let that sit. "Mr. Carter, I have watched the news about the Prescott acquisition for 3 weeks now, and I have watched your name vanish from that company's directory this week, and I called you tonight because I believe this is the moment Raymond was talking about. This is when it matters." Ethan looked toward the doorway where his 8-year-old daughter was holding up a shoebox universe and calling, "Daddy, come see I finished." And he made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost wasn't. "I need to call you back, Ms. Voss." "Of course. But Mr. Carter, one more thing before you go." Her voice sharpened just slightly into the voice of a woman who'd read the fine print of 1,000 contracts. "Your stake carries voting rights. And under the shareholder agreement, your late employer signed a stakeholder of your size has the right to be notified of and to attend any board vote concerning the sale of the company." A beat. "As far as I can tell, nobody at Halstead has notified you of anything, which means they either forgot you exist." Another beat. "Or they were counting on it." Ethan hung up and sat very still for a long moment. Then he got up, walked into the living room, and knelt down beside his daughter's shoebox solar system and told her it was the finest galaxy he had ever seen. And it was. It really was. But that night, after she was asleep, he did not sleep either. The next morning at Halstead Manufacturing, the wheels were coming off. Line 4 was down. 2 men from the day shift had been reassigned to babysit a machine that wouldn't run, and the backup coolant system Ethan had jury-rigged 11 years ago finally gave out at 9:40 a.m., taking Line 2 offline with it. By 10 o'clock, the plant was producing at 40% of the tempo the acquisition required, and the numbers on Victoria Hayes' screen were bleeding red in a way no spreadsheet could hide. She had not slept. She had spent the night reading and rereading 3 safety memos, and a name that appeared on all of them. And when Marcus Bell knocked on her office door at 8:15, wearing a smile and a fresh suit, she had to press her palms flat against her thighs to keep from saying what she was thinking. "Rough morning," Marcus said, dropping into the chair across from her without being asked. "But I've got it contained. I'm bringing in a contractor crew to look at Line 4. Outside eyes. We'll have it—" "Marcus." Victoria kept her voice even. "How many times did Ethan Carter warn us about the Line 4 seals?" The smile flickered. "Just like before." "I'm sorry. It's a simple question. Once maybe he was always filing something. The man complained about everything, Victoria, that's just 3 times." She said it quietly. "He warned us 3 times. In writing. 4 months ago, 2 months ago, 3 weeks ago." She turned her monitor so it faced him. "And every single one of those memos was submitted to you, received by you, marked reviewed by you, and filed by you, and never once brought to me." The office went silent. Marcus Bell looked at the screen, and Victoria watched him do the thing she'd seen 100 executives do across 100 tables, the fast private calculation of how much was known and how much could still be denied. "Victoria," he spread his hands warm, reasonable. "You have any idea how many memos cross my desk in a week? I can't run every maintenance gripe up to the CEO. That's literally my job to filter. If I brought you every doomsday note from every tech who wanted attention, you'd never—" He was right, Marcus. "Get anything done and—" He stopped. What? He was right. She stood up. "The seal he named in these memos is the exact seal that failed yesterday. The failure he predicted is the failure that shut down my plant. The man wasn't crying wolf. There was a wolf. And you knew there was a wolf, and you buried it, and then you sat in my boardroom and told me to let him walk." Marcus's jaw tightened, and for just a moment the warmth drained out of his face, and Victoria saw underneath it the cold, quick, cornered thing that had been running this play from the start. "You want to be careful. he said softly, about what you're accusing me of. I've given 8 years to this company. I'm about to close a $1.2 billion deal that saves it. And you want to torch all of that over a maintenance man's paperwork? He stood buttoning his jacket. Fire me 11 days before the biggest acquisition in this company's history, and see how the board likes explaining that to Prescott. See how they like explaining it to your father's memory. It was the wrong thing to say. Victoria went very still. Don't, she said, ever put my father's name in your mouth to protect yourself. He'd have thrown you out of this building himself. Marcus held her eyes for a long, cold second. Then he smiled again. A different smile now, a thin and ugly one, and walked out. And Victoria stood alone in her office, and realized with a slow-dropping dread that she'd just declared war on the one man who understood the acquisition better than anyone. 11 days before, it was supposed to close with her plant running at 40% and her whole future riding on it. She sat down. She pulled up the shareholder agreement Eleanor Voss had mentioned the night before, because she'd called Eleanor back at 1 in the morning, and Eleanor had told her about the trust and the 12% and the voting rights, and Victoria had lain awake since staring at the ceiling, doing math that terrified her. Ethan Carter didn't just know how to fix her plant. Ethan Carter owned 12% of it, and nobody had told him about the vote. At 11:20 that morning, Ethan Carter's phone rang for the third time in 10 minutes, and for the third time, it was a number he didn't recognize, and this time he answered it standing in the cereal aisle of a grocery store with Maddie hanging off the side of the cart. Mr. Carter, it's Karen from HR again. Please, Ms. Hayes would like to speak with you, personally. She's asked me to arrange it however works for you. She'll come to you. Ethan pulled a box of the cereal Maddie liked off the shelf and set it in the cart. Tell Ms. Hayes I've got nothing to say to her. Mr. Carter? She said her way or leave. I left. There's nothing left to talk about. It's not about your job. Karen's voice dropped, and there was something in it now that hadn't been there before, something close to fear. Mr. Carter, I don't fully understand it myself, but she used a word I've never heard her use about an employee. She said please, twice. She said, tell him please. A pause. In 4 years, I've never heard that woman say please to anybody. Ethan looked down at his daughter, who was reading the back of a cereal box out loud in a serious voice, sounding out the word riboflavin. And he felt the two halves of his life, the small one and the enormous one, Eleanor Voss had dropped on him last night, grind against each other. Tell her she can come to my house, he heard himself say. 7 o'clock, after my daughter's in bed. He paused. And Karen, tell her to come alone. Not Marcus Bell, not a lawyer, just her. He hung up before she could answer, and Maddie looked up at him and said, Who was that? Somebody from Daddy's old work. Are you going back? Ethan looked at the box of cereal in the cart, and then at his daughter, and gave her the only honest answer he had. I don't know yet, Bug, but I'm going to find out what they want. At 7:04 that evening, a black car that cost more than Ethan's house pulled up to the curb outside, and Victoria Hayes got out of it alone. She stood on the cracked front walk for a second, looking at the leaning porch and the mailbox that needed painting, and something moved across her face that Ethan, watching through the window, couldn't read. Then she came up the steps and knocked soft 3 times, and Ethan opened the door. They looked at each other. The last time they'd been in a room together, she'd been standing over a boardroom table telling him to fall in line or get out. Now she was standing on his welcome mat in a coat that probably cost more than he made in a month. And she looked, Ethan thought, like a woman who hadn't slept in a week. Which she hadn't. Mr. Carter, she said. Thank you for, She's asleep. He said it quietly, stepping back to let her in. My daughter, so we keep our voices down. Whatever you came to say, you say it like there's a sleeping kid in the next room. Because there is. Something in Victoria's throat worked. Of course. He led her to the kitchen, the same table, the same chairs, a crayon drawing taped to the wall of a stick figure man and a stick figure girl holding hands under a yellow sun. And he did not offer her coffee, and he did not sit until she did. Then he folded his hands on the table and waited. Victoria had spent the whole drive over rehearsing what she'd say. something measured, something professional, an acknowledgement of error, an offer of reinstatement, a generous number. She had it all lined up. And sitting across from him in his kitchen under his daughter's drawing, all of it fell apart, and what came out instead was the truth. "I was wrong," she said. "About you. About all of it. I stood up in that room, and I humiliated you, and I told you to leave, and I was wrong, and I've come to say it to your face, because you deserve to hear it to your face." She swallowed. "You warned us 3 times. You were right 3 times. And a man on my staff buried those warnings, and then let me fire you for making them, and I didn't see it because I didn't want to see anything that would slow the deal down." Her voice cracked just slightly. "People could have died in my plant. Because I wouldn't listen. You knew that, and I called you a maintenance technician and told you to fall in line." Ethan said nothing. He'd expected an offer. He hadn't expected an apology, and he certainly hadn't expected it to be real, and it knocked him off balance in a way anger never could have. "There's more," Victoria said. "And I think you already know part of it because I know Eleanor Voss called you." She met his eyes. "You own 12% of my company, Mr. Carter. My father left it to you. And in 11 days, there is a vote to sell that company to Prescott Industrial for $1.2 billion. And nobody notified you of that vote because nobody wanted you in the room." She paused. "I didn't know until last night. I swear to you, on my father's grave, I did not know." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Down the hall, a floorboard settled. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and gave up. "Why does Marcus Bell want this deal so badly?" Ethan asked finally. Victoria blinked because it wasn't the question she'd expected. "Because it's the deal that made his career. It's..." "No." Ethan shook his head slowly. "I've watched that man for 8 years, Ms. Hayes. He doesn't push this hard for the company. He never has. He pushes this hard when there's something in it for Marcus." He leaned forward. "Ask yourself who Prescott plans to keep after the merger and who they plan to cut. Ask yourself whose name is on the retention package." Victoria stared at him. She hadn't looked. In all the frenzy of the deal, in all the timelines and targets and pressure, she had never once thought to ask a question that obvious, and now that Ethan had said it out loud, it sat in the middle of the table like something alive. "You think," she said slowly, "that Marcus is being paid by Prescott to push this deal through on their terms. I think," Ethan said, "that a man who buries safety warnings to protect a schedule isn't protecting the schedule. He's protecting something the schedule is hiding." He sat back. "And I think you should find out what that is before you sign anything." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Victoria did something Ethan hadn't seen her do. She laughed short and disbelieving and pressed a hand to her forehead. "My father," she said quietly, "used to tell me the smartest person in any room at Halstead was almost never the one doing the talking. I never understood what he meant." She looked up. "I think I just met the person he was talking about." Ethan didn't answer that. He wasn't a man who knew what to do with a compliment, and he especially didn't know what to do with one from her. Instead, he stood, walked to the counter, and after a second's hesitation poured 2 cups of coffee and set one down in front of her. A small thing. But she understood it, and something in her shoulders came down half an inch. "I need your help," Victoria said, wrapping both hands around the cup. "I'll say it plainly, because I don't think you respect anything else. My plant is failing, and you're the only one who can fix it. My deal is corrupt, and you're the only one who saw it. And you own a piece of my company that gives you a vote I need. I came here to apologize, and I meant every word of it. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't also come here to ask you to come back." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. Victoria's face fell. She started to speak. "I'm not coming back as your maintenance technician," Ethan went on before she could. "I spent 17 years being invisible in that building, and I'm done being invisible. If I come back, and I haven't said I will, I don't come back to fix your seals and disappear again." He held her eyes. "I come back to that boardroom, as what I apparently am, as a man who owns 12% of the company and has a right to sit at that table and be heard. Those are the only terms I'll discuss. And Victoria Hayes, CEO, daughter of Raymond Halstead, the woman who 11 days ago would have laughed anyone out of the building for talking to her that way, looked across a scarred kitchen table at a man in a plain gray shirt and said the only word that made sense. Yes, they talked until nearly midnight. Not as CEO and technician that was gone, burned up somewhere between the boardroom and the kitchen, but as two people staring at the same fire from opposite sides trying to figure out how to put it out before it took the whole house. Ethan told her what he knew about the plant plainly and completely, the way he'd never been allowed to in 7 years of meetings. He told her which systems were held together with tape and prayer, which backups had already failed, which ones were about to. He told her that Line 4 could be brought back safely in 6 days if it was done right, and that it would blow in 3 weeks if it was done Marcus's way. He drew it out on the back of a permission slip because it was the paper closest to hand, and Victoria watched a man who'd been dismissed as a mop and bucket employee sketch the exact architecture of the machine her father had built from memory without a single error. And Victoria told him what she knew about the deal, about Prescott's lawyers and the strange urgency and the clauses she'd been told not to worry about the audit in 11 days and the board vote after it, about how badly she'd needed this to work and how that need had made her stupid and blind and cruel. "Here's what I don't understand," Ethan said around 11, rubbing his eyes. "If the plant is failing this badly, why does Prescott still want it? A buyer that careful doesn't pay $1.2 billion for a company whose production line is falling apart. Either they don't know," he stopped, "or they know something we don't." Victoria set down her cup slowly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe they're not buying the factory." He looked at her. "What else does Halstead own? Land, patents, contracts." And Victoria went still because there was something. Something she'd skimmed past a dozen times in the deal documents and never questioned because it hadn't seemed important. A parcel of land the company owned out past the old rail yard, 60 acres Raymond had bought decades ago, and never developed dead weight on the balance sheet that everyone had forgotten about. It had sat in the acquisition paperwork as a footnote, a rounding error. "There's land," she said slowly. 60 acres. My father bought it back in the 80s and never did anything with it. Prescott's lawyers put it in the deal without me even asking." She looked up and her face had gone pale. "They were very specific about that land. They wanted it included. I remember thinking it was strange, but I was so focused on the plant that I find out what's under that land," Ethan said quietly. "Or near it. Or planned for it. Find out why a company that doesn't want your failing factory is very specific about wanting 60 acres of empty dirt out past the rail yard." He leaned back. "Because I'll bet you my 12% that's what this whole thing is really about. Not the plant, not the workers, the land. And Marcus Bell knows." Victoria stared at him across the table, and for the first time in 11 days, she felt something other than pressure and dread and shame. She felt the ground shift under a thing she'd taken for solid, and she felt distantly the first cold thrill of understanding a game she hadn't known she was playing. "I have a friend at the county planning office," she said slowly. I do it quietly," Ethan said. "Don't use anyone Marcus can see. If we're right about him, he's watching you a lot closer than you think." Victoria nodded. She looked down at the permission slip covered in Ethan's neat, precise diagrams, and then she looked at the man across the table, and she said something she hadn't planned to say, something that surprised them both. "My father was right about you," she said quietly. "I spent 5 years thinking I knew who mattered in that building. I was wrong about all of it. I'm sorry it took nearly killing 40 men to teach me that, but I'm going to fix it. And I'd like to fix it with you, if you'll let me." Ethan looked at her for a long time. Then he stood, walked her to the door and paused with his hand on the knob. "My wife used to say something," he said. "She said the measure of a person isn't what they do when they're right. It's what they do the minute they find out they were wrong." He opened the door to the cold. You drove to a maintenance man's house at 7 o'clock at night to say you were wrong to his face. That counts for something, Miss Hayes. That counts for a lot." Victoria stepped out onto the porch, then turned back. "Victoria," she said. "If we're going to do this, it's Victoria." "Ethan," he said. She almost smiled. Then she got in the black car that cost more than his house and drove off into the dark, and Ethan stood on his leaning porch in the cold for a long moment, thinking about 60 acres of empty land and a man who buried warnings and a founder who'd left a fortune to the one person he trusted and knew with the certainty of a man who'd fixed broken things his whole life that something much bigger than a plant was about to break wide open. Inside down the hall, his daughter slept under a ceiling where a shoebox universe hung drying on a length of string. Small things, she'd told him. Small things still count. He locked the door and went to check on her the way he did every night, and stood in her doorway watching her breathe. And for the first time since he'd walked out of that boardroom, the fear was gone completely, and in its place was something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt ready. The next morning, Victoria Hayes made a phone call to a friend at the county planning office, using her personal cell from her car in a parking lot 3 miles from the plant. And what that friend told her after a pause and a lowered voice, and the sound of a door being quietly closed, made her grip the steering wheel so hard her knuckles went white. "Victoria," her friend said, "where did you hear about that parcel? Because that information isn't public yet. That's not supposed to be out for another 2 months." "What information?" Victoria said. "What's on that land?" And her friend told her. "A rail terminal," her friend said. "A federal freight and logistics hub. Victoria, in 18 months, the state is announcing a $2 billion rail expansion, and that 60 acres your father bought back in the 80s sits dead center of the route. Whoever owns that land when the announcement drops is holding the single most valuable parcel in the county." Victoria sat in her car in a parking lot 3 miles from the plant and did not say anything for a long moment. "How valuable?" she managed. "The land's on your books at what, maybe $2 million. After the announcement, it's worth 60, maybe 70, and the company that controls it controls access to the whole terminal. That's not a real estate deal, Victoria. That's a chokehold on freight for the entire region for the next 50 years. A pause. "Whoever told you to include that parcel in a sale knew exactly what they were doing, and whoever's buying knew even more." Victoria thanked her friend, hung up, and sat with both hands on the wheel and the engine off, and the whole shape of the thing finally clicking into place, piece by cold piece. Prescott didn't want the factory. They had never wanted the factory. They were paying $1.2 billion for a failing manufacturer, because buried inside that manufacturer, disguised as a rounding error, was 60 acres of dirt, about to become the most valuable land in the state. And the moment the acquisition closed, they would gut the plant, lay off 200 workers, and sit on that parcel until the rail announcement made them richer than God. And Marcus Bell had known. That was the part that made her hands shake. Marcus had known, and he'd steered the deal, and he'd buried the safety warnings not to save the schedule, but to keep anyone from looking too closely at any of it. Every push, every timeline, every let him walk, all of it, was Marcus clearing the board so the sale would close before anyone figured out what was actually being sold. At 9:15 that morning, she called Ethan, and when he answered, she didn't say hello. "It's the land," she said. "You were right. It's the land." There was a pause on the line, and then Ethan said quietly, "Tell me." She told him. The rail terminal, the $2 billion expansion, the 60 acres sitting dead center, the numbers that turned a rounding error into a fortune. And Ethan listened without interrupting. And when she finished, he was quiet for so long, she thought the call had dropped. "Ethan, I'm here." His voice had changed. It had gone flat and hard, the voice of a man who'd just watched the last piece of an ugly picture slide into place. "So let me make sure I understand it. Prescott's going to buy the company, close the plant, put 200 men out of work, and the whole time the thing they're actually paying for is a piece of land those 200 men will never even know about." A beat. And Marcus gets paid to make it happen quietly. That's what it looks like. That's not a business deal, Victoria. That's a robbery with a signing bonus. He exhaled slowly. When's the vote? 10 days, but the operational audit is in 3. If we fail the audit, Prescott can renegotiate the price down or walk. Marcus is scrambling to get line 4 running before the auditors show up because a dead production line raises exactly the questions we don't want raised. Then that's our window, Ethan said. The audit. If those auditors walk that floor in 3 days and see a plant held together with tape, they're going to start asking why a company this broken is worth $1.2 billion. And the answer to that question is the land. And the second, anyone says the word land out loud in front of the right people, the whole thing unravels. He paused. Marcus needs that audit to go clean, which means the audit is exactly where we hit him. Victoria closed her eyes. I need you to come in, Ethan, not for the plant, for this. I'll be there in an hour, he said. But we do it my way. And Victoria, from this second on, you don't tell Marcus anything, not a word. As far as he knows, you're still the tired CEO who just wants the deal to close. Let him keep thinking he's winning. It's the only advantage we've got. At 10:40 that morning, Ethan Carter walked back into Halstead Manufacturing for the first time since he'd walked out, and the reaction on the plant floor was something he'd remember for the rest of his life. Danny Ruiz saw him first and just stopped a wrench hanging forgotten in his hand. Then Bobby saw him, and then the whole day shift one by one, turning to look, and for a second, nobody said anything. And then Danny crossed the floor in 6 long strides and grabbed Ethan by both shoulders and said, "You son of a gun," in a voice that was trying very hard not to crack, and the whole floor broke into something between a cheer and a laugh, and men who hadn't shaken Ethan's hand in years lined up to shake it now. Ethan hadn't expected that either. He'd spent 17 years being invisible, and he'd assumed invisibility was mutual, that if nobody upstairs saw him, nobody down here did either. He was wrong. These men had seen him every single day. They'd just been waiting the way working men wait for the day the people upstairs finally saw him too. "All right," Ethan said when the noise died down, his own voice not quite steady. "All right. Enough. We've got a plant to save and about 72 hours to do it in. Danny, walk me to line 4. Tell me everything that's failed since I left. Don't leave anything out." Danny fell into step beside him, and as they walked, Danny's face went serious. "There's something you should know first. Marcus has been down here twice a day since the line went down. Asking questions. Real specific questions." Danny lowered his voice. "Not about how to fix it, Ethan. About how long it'll look bad. He asked me his exact words, how long before we can make it look operational. Not be operational. Look operational." Ethan stopped walking. "He wanted to fake it," Ethan said slowly. "He wanted to make a deadline look alive for the audit. That's what it sounded like to me. I told him you can't fake a pressure test. He didn't like that answer." Ethan started walking again, faster now, his mind moving. "Danny, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it quiet. Every failure log, every warning, every maintenance ticket from the last 3 weeks, I want copies. Paper copies. Off the system where Marcus can't touch them or wipe them." He glanced at Danny. "Can you get me that today? I can get you that in an hour. Then get it. Because I don't think we're just fixing a plant anymore, Danny. I think we're building a case." At 1:30 that afternoon in a conference room 3 floors up, Marcus Bell was having a very different conversation. He was on the phone, door closed, blinds drawn, and the voice on the other end belonged to a man from Prescott's acquisition team, the man who 6 months ago had first floated the idea of a retention package with Marcus's name on it and a number attached that Marcus had never told his wife about. "The line's still down," Marcus said quietly. "The auditors come in 3 days. If they see a dead production floor, they're going to dig." "Then don't let them see a dead production floor," the voice said. "Handle it. You've handled everything else. The one tech who could have fixed it walked out. That's the good news. The bad news is, Hayes brought him back this morning." A pause on the line. "Carter's back. Just for the plant. He doesn't know anything." Marcus rubbed his forehead. He's a maintenance guy. He fixes machines. He's not a threat. Marcus. The voice went cold. You told me 6 months ago there were no threats. Then you told me the safety memos were buried. Now the man who wrote those memos is back inside the building 3 days before the audit at the CEO's personal invitation. A pause. You're sure Hayes doesn't know about the land? She's got no idea. She thinks she's saving her father's company. She's too busy panicking about the plant to look at anything else. Keep it that way. Because if this deal falls apart, it doesn't fall apart on us. It falls apart on you. You understand that. Marcus understood that. Marcus had understood it for 6 months. He hung up the phone and sat in the dim conference room and told himself the way he'd been telling himself since the beginning, that it wasn't really stealing if it was all technically legal, and that 200 jobs were going to be lost either way, and that a man had to look out for himself in this world because nobody else would. He'd gotten very good at those speeches. He almost believed them. He did not know that 11 feet below him on the plant floor, Ethan Carter was already assembling the paper trail that would end his career. And he did not know that Victoria Hayes, whom he'd dismissed as a panicking CEO, had spent the morning quietly pulling the original acquisition documents and circling one 60-acre parcel in red ink. At 4 o'clock, Ethan and Victoria met in her office with the door locked, and for the first time, they laid all the pieces on the table at once. Danny's paper log showing every failure and every warning. The 3 buried safety memos with Marcus's name on every reviewed stamp. The acquisition documents with the 60-acre parcel circled. And printed and folded in Victoria's pocket, an email her IT director had quietly recovered that morning, an email Marcus thought he'd deleted sent from his account to an outside address with the subject line, Parcel 7, keep off the audit. That's it. Victoria said, her voice tight. That's the whole thing in one line. He knew about the land. He was hiding the land from his own auditors. This is... She stopped. This is a crime, Ethan. This isn't corporate hardball. Recovered emails, buried safety warnings, a hidden asset. This is fraud. People go to prison for this. Then let him go to prison for it, Ethan said quietly. But not yet. Victoria looked at him. What do you mean, not yet? We have him. We could take this to the board tonight, and Marcus would have a lawyer by morning and a story by lunch. Ethan shook his head slowly. Right now, Victoria, he thinks he's winning. He thinks you're panicking and I'm fixing machines and nobody's looking at the land. That's the most dangerous thing we can take away from him too early, his confidence. The second he knows we're onto him, he starts covering deleting lawyering, calling Prescott. We lose the element of surprise, and we might lose the whole case. So what do? We let him keep believing it. We fix line 4 for real safely my way so the audit's clean, and Prescott has no excuse to renegotiate. We let Marcus think everything's going exactly to plan. Ethan leaned forward. And then at the board vote, when he's standing up there taking credit for the deal of his career in front of the whole board and Prescott's people, that's when we put every piece of this on the table at once. All of it. The land, the emails, the buried memos. In public, where he can't spin it, and can't bury it, and can't run. He held her eyes. You don't corner a man like Marcus in private. He'll always find a way out. You corner him in front of the people he's been lying to. That's the only way it sticks. Victoria stared at him. You've thought about this a lot. I've watched that man for 8 years, Ethan said simply. I know how he wins. He wins by being the only one who knows the whole picture, so we beat him by making sure everyone knows it at the exact same moment. He paused. But it only works if the audit's clean. If line 4 fails that audit, Prescott walks or renegotiates, and there's no board vote to ambush him at. Everything depends on that floor. Victoria nodded slowly. Then she asked the question that had been sitting under everything all afternoon. Can you do it, line 4? Safely, in 3 days. Ethan was quiet for a moment. 200 men work that floor, Victoria. If I rush it to make an audit look good, I'm doing exactly what Marcus wanted to do, making it look alive when it's not. I won't do that. I'll fix it right, or I won't fix it at all. He met her eyes. But if you get me the parts I need and the men I need, and you keep Marcus out of my way, yeah, I can do it right in 3 days, barely, but I can. Then tell me what you need, he told her. And she wrote it all down, and by 6 o'clock that evening, a parts order Marcus never saw was moving, and by 7, Danny Ruiz had pulled the 6 best men on the floor for a job they weren't told the real reason for, and by 8, Ethan Carter was up to his elbows in the number 3 coolant regulator, doing the work he'd been begging to do for 4 months, the work that would either save 200 jobs or end a scam worth a fortune, and probably both. He worked through the night, somewhere around 2 a.m. Danny found him still at it, sleeves rolled, hands black, and set a cup of gas station coffee down beside him. "You should go home," Danny said. "See your kid." "My kid's asleep, and there's a neighbor with her good woman known her for years." Ethan didn't look up from the regulator. "I'll see Maddie at breakfast. Right now, this line's more important than my sleep." Danny watched him work for a minute. "Can I ask you something?" "You're gonna anyway." "The money." Danny said it carefully. "Word gets around. They're saying you own a piece of this place now, a big piece. Enough that you never have to work another day in your life." He paused. "So why are you standing in a machine at 2 in the morning with grease up to your elbows? Man in your position could be home, could be anywhere." Ethan was quiet for a moment, tightening a fitting. "You know what I thought about," he said finally. "The first night after that lawyer told me the number, I thought about my wife, Sarah. She got sick, and we fought that insurance company for 2 years while she was dying. And you know why we lost every appeal?" He looked up. "Because there was nobody on our side who understood the machine. The paperwork, the systems, the fine print. They had 100 people who knew how it all worked, and we had us. And they buried us. Not because we were wrong, because we couldn't see the whole picture, and they made sure we never would." He went back to the regulator. "That's what Marcus is doing to these 200 men, he said. Same exact thing that company did to Sarah. Betting they're too small to see the whole picture. Betting nobody who understands the machine is on their side." He tightened the last fitting and wiped his hands. "Well, somebody who understands the machine is on their side now. That's why I'm standing in it at 2 in the morning, Danny. The money doesn't change that. If anything, the money's the only reason I've got the power to do a damn thing about it." Danny didn't say anything for a while. Then he picked up a wrench. "Move over," he said. "2 of us finish faster than 1. They finished at 4:50 in the morning. And when Ethan ran the first safe pressure test on line 4 in 4 months, and the gauge climbed steady and held right where it was supposed to hold both men, just stood there and watched the needle, and neither one said anything. Because some things a working man feels don't have words. The next day, the day before the audit, everything nearly came apart. At 11 a.m., Marcus Bell walked onto the plant floor unannounced and found line 4 running. He stopped dead. He'd come down expecting a corpse, a deadline he could point the auditors around a problem he could spin. Instead, the machine was alive, humming, and Ethan Carter was standing next to it with a clipboard calm as Sunday. "It's running," Marcus said. There was something wrong in his voice, something too tight. "It's running," Ethan agreed. "How?" "The way it was supposed to run 4 months ago. I recalibrated the seals." Ethan set the clipboard down. "It'll pass the audit clean. No surprises." "Isn't that what you wanted, Marcus, a clean audit?" And for just a second, 1 second, Marcus Bell's face did something it wasn't supposed to do. Because a clean audit was what he'd been telling everyone he wanted. But it wasn't actually what he wanted at all, and Ethan, watching him closely, saw the gap between the two open up right there on his face. Marcus wanted the deal to close before anyone looked too hard. A perfectly running plant invited exactly the kind of confidence that made careful buyers relax and careless boards vote fast. But it also invited auditors to wonder why a healthy plant was selling at all. Marcus had wanted a plant just broken enough to justify a fast, quiet, don't-look-too-close sale, and Ethan had just taken that away from him. "Good," Marcus said finally, recovering the smile sliding back on. "Good work, Carter. See, this is why we kept you around." He clapped Ethan on the shoulder, a gesture so false it was almost funny. Knew you'd come through. Anything for the company, Ethan said mildly. Marcus walked off, and Ethan watched him go, watched the stiffness in his shoulders, and knew two things for certain. He knew Marcus was rattled, and he knew a rattled Marcus was a dangerous Marcus because a cornered man stops playing careful and starts playing desperate. He was right. 2 hours later at 1:15, Victoria called him, and her voice was shaking. "He knows something's wrong," she said. "Marcus just came to my office. He wants to move the board vote up. He's telling the board the plant's fixed, the audit's a formality. There's no reason to wait 10 days, we should vote to approve the sale in 48 hours. He's already got 3 board members agreeing with him." A breath. "Ethan, if that vote moves up, we lose our window. The audit hasn't even happened. We won't have time to put the case together. He's trying to close this thing before we're ready." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "Can you stop it? I'm the CEO, but I'm not the board. If enough of them side with Marcus, the vote moves, and I can't—" She stopped. Wait, there's something." He could hear her flipping pages. "The shareholder agreement. Eleanor mentioned it. A vote on the sale of the company requires notification of all major stakeholders with at least 7 days' notice." Her voice changed. "Ethan, you're a major stakeholder, 12%. And you were never notified of the original vote, let alone a moved-up one. If they try to vote in 48 hours, they're voting illegally." Ethan finished, and something cold and certain settled in his chest. "Because they never notified me. And the second they hold a vote without proper notice to a 12% stakeholder, that vote isn't valid. And any deal that comes out of it is challengeable in court." "So they can't move it up," Victoria said. "They legally cannot hold that vote in 48 hours without notifying you 7 days in advance, which means the vote stays where it is. 10 days out, right where we need it." Ethan let out a slow breath. Marcus just tried to close early and walked straight into the one wall he can't climb. Me. He almost laughed. The maintenance man he wanted gone is the only reason the deal can't close before we're ready for it. There was a silence on the line. Then Victoria said quietly, "My father knew. When he gave you that stake, he didn't just do it because he trusted you. He did it because a stakeholder has power a technician never could. He gave you a seat at the table on purpose, because he knew someday someone might try to steal this company, and he wanted one honest man in the room with the legal standing to stop it." A pause. "He was protecting the company from beyond the grave, and he chose you to do it." Ethan stood on the plant floor, phone to his ear, and looked down the length of line 4 running clean and steady, and thought about an old man with a thermos of coffee who'd walked this floor every morning and known every man's name. "Then I'd better not let him down," Ethan said quietly. That evening he went home in time for dinner for the first time all week. Maddie showed him a drawing she'd made at school, a stick figure man in a gray shirt, standing in front of a big square building, and a stick figure girl beside him, and above them, in careful 8-year-old letters, "My dad fixes things." Ethan looked at it for a long time. "Yeah, Bug," he said finally, and his voice wasn't quite steady. "Yeah, your dad fixes things." He taped it to the wall next to the other one under the yellow sun. Then he made grilled cheese with the corners cut off and helped her with her spelling, and read her 2 chapters instead of 1. And after she was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table in the quiet and looked at everything they had, the logs, the memos, the circled parcel, the recovered email. And he understood that in 9 days he was going to walk into a boardroom and take on a man who was smarter, richer, and more ruthless than him, in front of a board that had spent 17 years not knowing his name. And he was not afraid. The audit came the next morning. 2 auditors from Prescott, sharp-eyed and thorough, walked the entire plant floor with clipboards and instruments, and Ethan walked it with them, answering every question plainly and completely, hiding nothing about the plant, because there was nothing about the plant to hide anymore. Line 4 ran clean. Every system he'd fixed held, and at the end of 6 hours, the lead auditor shook Ethan's hand and said, "Honestly, this is one of the better maintained floors I've seen. Whoever's been keeping this place running knows what they're doing." "We've had good people," Ethan said. The audit passed. Clean. No excuse for Prescott to renegotiate, no deadline to raise questions. Nothing at all out of place, except the 160-acre parcel of dirt the auditors never thought to ask about, because their own bosses had told them not to. The deal was on track. The vote was set, 9 days out. And Marcus Bell, watching the audit clear from his office window, allowed himself to relax for the first time in a week and told himself it was almost over and that he'd won. He had no idea that the clean audit he thought was his salvation was the exact thing Ethan needed. Because a failed audit would have blown the deal up messily in private with lawyers and renegotiations and no clear villain. But a clean audit meant the deal marched straight ahead to the one place Ethan wanted it to go. A boardroom. A vote. Every player in one room at one table. The exact place where the whole thing would finally come apart in front of everyone. That night, Victoria called Ethan one last time before the long wait began. 9 days, she said. You really think we can pull this off? Ethan looked down the hall toward his daughter's room, where a shoebox universe hung from a string in the dark, every small planet in its place. I think, he said, that Marcus Bell has spent his whole life betting that the quiet people won't fight back. He paused. He's about to find out he bet wrong. He bet wrong. But over the next 9 days, Marcus Bell did everything a smart man does when the ground starts to feel unsteady beneath him, and Ethan Carter watched every move of it and said nothing. The first thing Marcus did on day 2 of the wait was try to get rid of Ethan again, cleaner this time. He went to Victoria's office with a proposal wrapped in a smile. Now that the plant's stable, he said, there's no reason to keep Carter on the payroll. Generous severance, a nice handshake, everybody's happy. We closed the deal with a lean floor. Prescott likes lean. He said it casually, like it was housekeeping. And Victoria, who had spent 3 years watching Marcus Bell make problems disappear with exactly that tone of voice, understood that he wanted Ethan out of the building before the vote. Not fired, just gone, just not in the room. I'll think about it, she said, which was the kind of answer that had always ended the conversation before. But this time Marcus didn't leave. He stood in her doorway a beat too long, and then he said lightly, You've been spending a lot of time with him, Carter. People are noticing. A pause. Just be careful, Victoria. A man like that suddenly back in the CEO's good graces. People wonder what he's got on you. It was a threat dressed as a warning, and Victoria felt it land exactly where he'd aimed it. For one cold second, she almost believed she'd been made that Marcus knew everything, that the whole plan was already dead. Then she looked at his face and understood he was fishing. He didn't know. He was nervous, and a nervous Marcus threw punches to see what flinched. She didn't flinch. I spend time with him because he saved my plant, she said evenly. Which is more than you did. She turned back to her monitor. Close the door on your way out. She called Ethan the second Marcus was gone, and her hand was shaking. He tried to get you severed. He wants you gone before the vote. Of course he does, Ethan said. I'm the one thing standing between him and a clean close. He can feel it even if he can't name it. A pause. Did you agree to anything? No, but Ethan, he's watching us. He said people are noticing. He's not sure yet, but he's looking. Then we stop meeting where he can see us, Ethan said. No more office visits, no more calls on the company line. Anything we've got to say, we say off-site, or we don't say it. He was quiet for a moment. This is the dangerous part, Victoria. The days before. A cornered man's most alert right before he thinks he's safe. We keep our heads down, and we let him talk himself into believing he's already won. 9 more days. On day 4, Ethan did something he hadn't planned to do. He went to see Eleanor Voss. He drove across town to a quiet law office and sat across a desk from the woman who'd changed his life over the phone. And for the first time, he saw her face. 60-something, sharp-eyed gray hair pulled back severe. The kind of person who'd spent a career reading contracts other people signed without reading. She poured him coffee and let him sit for a minute before she spoke. You came to ask me if it's real, she said. The stake, whether it'll hold up. I came to ask you what my father-in-law... Ethan stopped, surprised at himself. Raymond Halstead hadn't been his father-in-law. He'd been his boss. But the word had come out that way, and Eleanor didn't correct it, and something passed between them. I came to ask what Raymond expected me to do with it, because a man doesn't give away $140 million for no reason. And I keep feeling like he handed me a job, and I want to know what the job is." Eleanor studied him for a long moment. Then she opened a drawer, took out an envelope worn soft at the edges from years of sitting, and slid it across the desk. "He wrote you a letter," she said, "8 years ago. He told me to give it to you if, and only if, you ever came to my office and asked a question like the one you just asked. He was very specific. He said, Ethan will only ask what to do with it if he's already decided he can't keep it for himself. And that's the only kind of man I'd trust with the answer." She nodded at the envelope. "You just passed a test a dead man set for you, Mr. Carter. Go ahead, read it." Ethan's hands were not entirely steady as he opened it. The handwriting was Raymond's. He'd know it anywhere, having seen it on 1,000 work orders and maintenance notes over 17 years. The letter was short. "Ethan, if you're reading this, then either I'm gone or something's gone wrong, and either way, you went looking for the right thing to do instead of the easy thing. That's why I picked you. I've watched a lot of men come through this company. Most of them wanted something. You never did. You just wanted to do the work right and go home to your family. And in 40 years of business, I met maybe 3 men I could say that about. The company's going to need protecting someday from people who see it as a thing to be carved up instead of a place where people feed their kids. When that day comes, the board will be full of people with reasons. You're the one without a reason. That's your qualification. Don't let them talk you into thinking your hands are too dirty to sit at that table. Dirty hands built everything worth building. R.H. Ethan read it twice. Then he set it down and looked out the window for a while, and Eleanor Voss had the decency not to say anything. "He knew," Ethan said finally. "Not the specifics, but he knew someone would come for this place. And he planted me in the middle of it 8 years ago like a bolt he tightened extra so it wouldn't shake loose. He called you his insurance policy," Eleanor said quietly. "I told him that was a cold way to talk about a man he clearly loved. He said, it's the warmest thing I've ever done. I'm making sure the one person who'd never betray these people will always have the standing to save them." She folded her hands. 6 days from now, Mr. Carter, you're going to sit in a boardroom as a 12% stakeholder. I'll be there beside you as counsel. And everything Raymond Halstead built is going to come down to whether one honest man can stand his ground in a room full of people who've spent their whole lives learning how to make honest men sit down. She met his eyes. "Can you?" Ethan folded the letter and put it in his shirt pocket over his heart, where it would stay through everything that came after. "I've been standing my ground in that building for 17 years, he said. "Nobody just happened to be looking. 6 days from now, they'll all be looking." He stood. "That's fine. Let them look." On day 6, the plan almost died. Danny Ruiz called Ethan at 9 p.m., and his voice was low and fast. "We got a problem." Marcus pulled the maintenance logs, the paper ones. "The originals I copied for you, he went into the file room himself this afternoon, and now 3 weeks of failure logs are missing. Gone. The originals Ethan. He's covering." Ethan sat down slowly. The paper logs were a pillar of the whole case, the physical, uneditable proof that the failures Ethan predicted had happened exactly when and how he said. If Marcus had destroyed the originals, then all Ethan had were copies, and a lawyer could argue copies could be faked, and the certainty of the whole thing cracked. "How much did you copy before he took them?" Ethan asked. "All of it. Every page. But Ethan, they're copies. He's got the originals, or he burned them. Either way, in a room full of lawyers, he says your copies are doctored, and it's his word against—" "No," Ethan said, and something in his voice made Danny stop. "Not his word against ours. Danny, when you made those copies, where'd you make them?" "The machine in the file room." "Why?" "That machine. Does it log? Does it keep a record of what it copies?" A pause. I don't know, maybe. The new ones do, don't they? For billing, for toner counts." "Find out," Ethan said. "Because if that machine kept a time-stamped record of every page you copied, then we don't need Marcus's originals. We've got proof those pages existed in that file room on that date before he touched them. A copier log is a witness Danny, a witness that can't be threatened or bought or talked out of what it saw." He was already reaching for his coat. And there's one more thing. If Marcus went into that file room to destroy evidence 6 days before a board vote, that's not a nervous executive anymore. That's a man committing a crime to cover a crime. And that changes what we're dealing with. That's the moment this stopped being about a bad deal and started being about prison. Danny found the copier log the next morning. It was all there. Every page time-stamped dated 6 days before Marcus ever set foot in that file room. And Ethan, holding the printout, understood that Marcus had made the mistake that ruthless men always eventually make. He'd been so focused on destroying the thing in front of him that he never thought about the quiet machine in the corner that had been watching the whole time. But the missing originals told Ethan something else, something that turned his stomach cold. Marcus was cleaning up. And a man who starts cleaning up is a man who's getting ready to be looked at, or a man who knows he's about to be gone. Which meant Marcus might be planning to move before the vote after all, which meant their 9 days might be shorter than they thought. On day 7, it got worse. Victoria called Ethan at 6 a.m., and she'd been crying, and she was furious in the way people are furious when they're scared. Prescott sent over a revised timeline. They want to close the moment the vote passes, same day. Papers signed, money wired, done before anyone can. Ethan, they know. Somehow they know we're onto something, or Marcus told them, and now they're rushing to slam the door before we can get a foot in it. A breath. And there's more. Marcus put a motion in front of the board last night. He wants me recused from the vote. He's telling them I've got a conflict of interest, that I've been compromised by my relationship with a stakeholder, meaning you. He's trying to get the one person who'd fight him thrown out of her own boardroom. Ethan closed his eyes. It was a good move. He had to admit, a genuinely good move. Marcus couldn't get rid of Ethan's stake, but if he could get Victoria recused and Ethan painted as the shady stakeholder who'd compromised her, he could flip the whole story. Suddenly, Ethan and Victoria weren't the ones exposing a fraud. They were the suspicious pair the board needed protection from. He's not covering anymore, Ethan said slowly. He's attacking. He's decided the best defense is to make us the villains before we can make him one. He rubbed his face. Victoria, listen to me. This is exactly what I was afraid of. He's smart and he's cornered, and cornered smart men don't run. They attack the credibility of whoever's coming for them. If he gets you recused, we lose our strongest voice in that room. We can't let that motion pass. How do I stop it? He's already got board members whispering, I'm the CEO, but if the board votes to recuse me, I'm out. Ethan was quiet for a moment, and then he saw the whole shape of it, and his voice changed. Then we don't fight the recusal, he said. We use it. What? Think about it, Victoria. If Marcus is so desperate to get you out of that room, so willing to burn credibility and spook the board and rush Prescott, then whatever's in that room is worth more to him than his own reputation. A man doesn't throw everything he has at getting one person recused unless that person could sink him. Marcus is telling us with every move he makes exactly how afraid he is. Ethan leaned forward. So let him make his motion. Let him stand up in front of the board and argue that you're compromised, that I'm dangerous, that we need to be kept out. Let him build his whole case around the idea that Ethan Carter is a threat to this company. A pause. And then, when he's finished telling everyone how dangerous I am, I stand up. And I show them exactly why he needs me gone. And every word he just said about how much of a threat I am becomes proof that he was right to be afraid for all the wrong reasons. There was a long silence on the line. You want to walk into a trap? Victoria said slowly, and spring it from the inside. I want him to build the stage, Ethan said, and then I want to be the one standing on it when the lights come up. He paused. But it only works if we hold our nerve for 2 more days. No matter what he does, no matter how scared it makes you. We let him think every move is working. We let him get all the way to the edge of winning. Because a man who thinks he's won stops watching his own back. Victoria wiped her face. My father would have loved you, she said. You know that he'd have absolutely loved you. He gave me $140 million and a letter, Ethan said. I think he did. On day 8, the night before the vote, Ethan almost lost his nerve not over the plan, but over the price of it. He was home sitting at the kitchen table with everything spread out one last time, and Maddie couldn't sleep. And she padded out in her pajamas and climbed into the chair next to him and looked at all the papers. "Is this the bad thing?" she asked. "The thing you have to fix?" "Yeah, Bug. This is the bad thing." She looked at it for a while, her chin on the table. "Are you scared?" Ethan started to say no the way parents do. Then he remembered the promise. Never lie to her about anything that matters. "A little," he said. "Tomorrow I have to go say some hard, true things in front of a lot of important people. And some of them aren't going to want to hear it. And one of them is going to try very hard to make everyone believe I'm a liar." He looked at her. "So yeah, I'm a little scared." Maddie considered this with the enormous seriousness of an 8-year-old. "But you're going to say the true things anyway." "Yeah, I am." "Then it's okay to be scared." She said it like she was explaining something obvious to a slow adult. "Miss Perry says being brave isn't when you're not scared. Being brave is when you're scared and you do the right thing anyway. So you're being brave." She yawned. "Mommy would think you're being brave too." Ethan had to look away for a moment. When he could talk again, he said, "You know what, Maddie Bug? You just described your Grandpa Raymond perfectly. And your mom. And every good person I ever met." He kissed the top of her head. "Come on, bed. Big day tomorrow." He carried her back down the hall and tucked her in under the shoebox, universe, hanging from its string, every small planet in its place, Pluto included, because small things still count. And he stood in her doorway a long time, and then he went back to the kitchen and put every paper in order, and he understood that tomorrow he was doing this for exactly 2 reasons. The 200 men on that floor and the little girl asleep down the hall who thought being brave meant doing the right thing, scared. He wasn't going to let either of them down. The morning of the vote came gray and cold. At 8:15, Ethan Carter put on the only suit he owned, the one he'd bought for Sarah's funeral, the only formal thing in his closet, and looked at himself in the mirror and did not recognize the man looking back, and then did. He drove Maddie to school. At the drop-off, she grabbed his hand before she got out. "Say the true things, Daddy." "I will, Bug." "And come pick me up. 3:15, don't forget." "I won't forget. 3:15, I'll be there." He'd made her that promise every school day for 3 years and never once broken it, and he wasn't about to start today, no matter what happened in that boardroom. "Go on, learn something." She ran off into the school purple backpack bouncing, and Ethan watched her go, and then drove to Halstead Manufacturing to save it. The board meeting was called for 10 a.m. in the executive conference room, the same long glass table where 3 weeks ago Victoria Hayes had told him to do it her way or leave. He arrived at 9:45 with Eleanor Voss beside him in a gray suit and a briefcase, and Danny Ruiz behind them, carrying a cardboard box of everything they'd assembled. And when the 3 of them walked into the executive wing, people stopped and stared, because a maintenance man and a floor supervisor did not belong up here, and everyone knew it, and that was exactly the point. At the conference room door, a security guard stepped in front of them. "I'm sorry, this is a closed board meeting. You can't." "Mr. Carter is a registered 12% stakeholder in this company," Eleanor Voss said, and produced a document from her briefcase without breaking stride, "and is entitled under Article 9 of the shareholder agreement to attend any meeting concerning the sale of the company. Here is his standing. Here is the notice requirement he was never given. And here is my bar card in case anyone would like to discuss whether this meeting is even legally constituted." She smiled without warmth. "Shall we go in, or shall we have that discussion in front of a judge?" The guard looked into the document, then he stepped aside. They walked in. The room went silent the way it had gone silent 3 weeks ago, but for the opposite reason. 3 weeks ago, it had gone silent because nobody had dared to stand up and walk out. Now it went silent because that same nobody had walked back in a funeral suit with a lawyer and a box, and every person at that table understood in an instant that something had changed, and they didn't yet know what. Victoria sat at the head of the table, and when her eyes met Ethan's, something steadied in her. Marcus Bell sat at her right hand, and Ethan watched the exact moment Marcus registered. Him watched the smile freeze, then rebuild itself, then curdle into something careful. "Victoria," Marcus said, not taking his eyes off Ethan. "What is this?" "This," Victoria said, "is a stakeholder exercising his right to attend. Mr. Carter owns 12% of this company. He was never notified of this vote, which, as I've recently learned, makes every version of it we've held so far legally questionable." She let that land on the board. "So before we vote on anything, we're going to make sure it's done right, which means Mr. Carter has the floor." "This is absurd." Marcus was on his feet now, turning to the board, and Ethan watched him do exactly the thing they'd predicted, go on the attack. "This man is a former maintenance employee who was terminated 3 weeks ago. He has spent that time cultivating a relationship with our CEO, a relationship that has frankly compromised her judgment. I move that we recuse Ms. Hayes from this vote and remove Mr. Carter from this room. We are 11 days from the most important acquisition in this company's history, and I will not watch it be hijacked by a disgruntled employee and whatever hold he has over—" "What hold?" Ethan said. It was the first thing he'd said, and he said it quietly, and it cut through Marcus's momentum like a blade, because it was so calm. "Excuse me," Marcus said. "You said I have a hold over Ms. Hayes. I'm asking what you think it is." Ethan set his cardboard box on the table. "Go ahead. Tell the board what you think I'm hiding. I'd like everyone to hear your theory before I show them what's actually in this box. Because in a minute, Marcus, everyone in this room is going to be thinking very hard about which one of us has been hiding something. And I want them to remember that you brought it up first." Marcus opened his mouth, and for the first time, nothing came out. Because he'd walked into it. He'd stood up and made himself the man who kept saying the word hiding, the word compromised, the word hijacked, and he'd done it in front of 11 board members who were now all of them looking not at Ethan, but at Marcus, and wondering. Ethan opened the box. "My name is Ethan Carter," he said to the board in the plain, steady voice he'd used on that floor for 17 years. "For 17 years, I kept this company's safety systems running. 3 weeks ago in this room, I warned Ms. Hayes that running line 4 at acquisition tempo without recalibrating the seals would cause a rupture. She told me to do it her way or leave. I left." He looked around the table. 4 days later, the exact seal I named failed. "Ms. Ruiz here." He nodded at Danny. "Shut the line down 90 seconds before it could have killed 40 men. That's not my opinion. That's the maintenance log." He set the first document on the table. Time-stamped, and a copier record proving it existed before anyone had a chance to make it disappear. Which someone tried to do 6 days ago. He didn't look at Marcus when he said it. He didn't have to. Everyone else did. "But that's not why I'm here." Ethan went on. "A failing seal is a safety problem. I'm here about something worse." He set the second document down, the 3 buried safety memos, Marcus's name stamped on every one. "I warned this company 3 times in writing over 4 months. Every warning went to one man. Every warning was marked, reviewed, and buried. The man who buried them," now he looked at Marcus, "is the same man who 3 weeks ago told this board to let me walk. Ask yourself why a man would bury the warnings of the one employee who could see the danger and then work so hard to get that employee out of the building. Ask yourself what he didn't want anyone looking at." The room was dead silent. "And then ask yourselves," Ethan said. And he set down the third document, the acquisition papers, the 60-acre parcel, circled in red, why Prescott Industrial is paying $1.2 billion for a manufacturing company they intend to shut down. Because they are going to shut it down. 200 jobs gone, and they're paying more than this company is worth to do it, which makes no sense at all. He paused. "Until you look at 60 acres of land out past the rail yard that everyone's been treating like a footnote. Land my company owns. Land that in 18 months is going to sit dead center of a $2 billion federal rail terminal. Land that's about to be worth 30 times what it's carried at on the books. A board member, an older man near the far end, leaned forward slowly. How do you know about the rail terminal? That's not public. It's not, Ethan agreed. It's not supposed to be announced for 2 months. So how does a maintenance man know? He let the question hang. The better question is, how does Prescott know? And how does the man who structured this deal know? He set down the last document, the recovered email, the one Marcus thought he'd deleted, subject line, Parcel 7, keep off the audit. Because he does. He's known the whole time. This deal was never about the plant. It was never about the workers. It was about buying 60 acres of the most valuable land in the state for pennies hidden inside a company sale before the people selling it ever found out what they were really giving away. He looked at Marcus. You didn't bury my safety warnings to protect a schedule, Marcus, Ethan said quietly. You buried them to keep me from being in a position to see this. You wanted me gone because I'm the one person who knows both the plant and this company well enough to add it up. And you almost got away with it. He straightened. The only reason you didn't is that the man you thought was too small to matter turned out to own 12% of the thing you were trying to steal. The silence in that room was the loudest thing Ethan had ever heard. Then Marcus Bell laughed a thin, ugly, desperate sound and stood up. And Ethan saw the last calculation run behind his eyes, the cornered animal deciding which way to bolt. This is a fantasy, Marcus said, but his voice was wrong now, too high, too fast. Doctored copies. A recovered email taken out of context. The paranoid theory of a bitter employee who got fired and can't let it go. You're going to torch a $1.2 billion deal, the deal that saves this company, on the word of a man who mops floors. He turned to the board, arms spread, and Ethan heard the exact moment the performance cracked. I have given 8 years to this company. 8 years. And I will not sit here and let this janitor. Careful, said the older board member quietly. Marcus stopped, because he'd heard it too. The room had turned. Somewhere in the last 90 seconds, without anyone announcing it, the board had stopped seeing a maintenance man and a lawyer and a box of paranoid theories and started seeing a documented fraud and the desperate man trying to shout it down. And the more Marcus reached for the old weapon, the word janitor, the word maintenance, the sneer that had worked in this building for 17 years, the more it turned in his hand and cut him instead. Victoria stood up at the head of the table. I've verified every document Mr. Carter just showed you, she said, and her voice did not shake at all. The maintenance logs, the copier records, the land assessment, the email. I pulled them myself quietly over the last 9 days because I didn't trust that they'd survive if I did it any other way. She looked down the table at Marcus. You told me to let him walk. You told me he was just a maintenance technician with a chip on his shoulder. You said it in this room, and I believed you, and I nearly signed away my father's company and 200 people's jobs because I believed you. Her voice dropped. My father left 12% of this company to a man he trusted more than anyone he ever worked with. I used to wonder why. I don't wonder anymore. She turned to the board. I'm calling for a different vote, she said. Not on the Prescott acquisition. On the immediate suspension of Marcus Bell, pending a full independent investigation into everything you've just seen. The buried safety warnings, the destroyed logs, the concealed land valuation, and his relationship with Prescott's acquisition team. She placed both hands flat on the table, in the same spot where 3 weeks ago she'd told Ethan to fall in line or leave. All in favor. And around that long glass table, one by one, the hands began to go up. Marcus Bell watched them rise. And in his face, Ethan saw something he almost felt sorry for. The exact moment a man realizes that the whole structure he's built his life on, the certainty that quiet people don't fight back, and small people don't matter, and the room always belongs to whoever talks the loudest, has just collapsed under him all at once. You'll regret this, Marcus said to the room, to no one, his voice barely holding. All of you. When Prescott, Eleanor Voss said pleasantly, opening her briefcase, is about to have a very difficult morning of its own. I've already forwarded everything to the State Attorney General's office and the securities regulators. Concealing a material asset valuation to manipulate an acquisition price is a great many crimes, Mr. Bell, in a great many jurisdictions. She smiled. You may want a lawyer. I'm not available. The hands were all up. The vote was unanimous. And Marcus Bell, who 3 weeks ago had sat at the right hand of the CEO who had run this deal and buried the warnings and destroyed the logs and nearly walked away with a fortune stolen from 200 people who'd never have known, stood alone at a glass table in a room full of raised hands and had nothing left to say. He gathered his things in silence. And as he walked toward the door past the maintenance man who'd beaten him, he stopped just for a second, close enough that only Ethan could hear. How? Marcus said. Just that. Not angry anymore, almost bewildered. You mop floors. How? Ethan looked at him, and he thought about Sarah and the insurance company, and 2 years of losing to men who understood the machine. He thought about Raymond's letter in his shirt pocket. He thought about 200 men in a shoebox universe and a little girl who thought being brave meant doing the right thing scared. Because you never once looked at me, Ethan said quietly. 17 years. You walked past me every day, and you never once saw a person. That was your mistake, Marcus, not the land, not the email. You just never thought the quiet man was watching. He held his eyes. We're always watching. You people never learn that. Marcus Bell had no answer. He walked out the door he'd tried so hard to push Ethan through, and he did not look back because there was nothing left in that room for him. And Ethan Carter stood in the boardroom where he'd once been told to do it their way or leave. And for the first time in 17 years, every single person at that table was looking right at him and seeing him and waiting to hear what he'd say next. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was 2:40. There was somewhere he had to be at 3:15. It was 2:40, and there was somewhere Ethan Carter had to be at 3:15. And 11 board members were staring at him, waiting for him to speak. He looked around the table one more time. And then he did the last thing anyone in that room expected. He closed the cardboard box, picked up his coat, and said, I have to go pick up my daughter from school. For a second, nobody moved. The older board member, the one who'd told Marcus to be careful, actually laughed out loud, a short, startled bark of a laugh. Mr. Carter, do you understand what's happening right now? You just stopped a $1.2 billion fraud. There are things we need to discuss, decisions. The company will still be here at 4 o'clock, Ethan said. My daughter gets out of school at 3:15 and I promised her I'd be there, and I've never broken that promise in 3 years, and I'm not going to start today of all days. He pulled on his coat. Whatever needs deciding, decide it, or wait for me, but I'm getting my kid. And he walked out of the boardroom the same door he'd walked out of 3 weeks ago when they told him to fall in line or leave. Except this time, the whole room watched him go. In a silence that had nothing to do with contempt and everything to do with something none of them had a word for yet. Victoria caught him at the elevator. Ethan, wait. She was half laughing, half stunned. You can't just do you have any idea what you just did in there? I said the true things, Ethan said. Like I told her I would. The elevator opened. He stepped in, then held the door. Victoria, the investigation, the Attorney General Prescott, that's all going to take weeks. Months. There's nothing that has to happen in the next hour that can't happen with me in it after 3:30. He almost smiled. You want to help come with me? You can meet her. Maddie's been asking who the lady in the fancy car was. Victoria Hayes, CEO, daughter of Raymond Halstead. A woman who had not left work early in 4 years looked at the maintenance man holding the elevator door and made a decision that surprised her more than anything else that day. Give me 30 seconds to grab my coat, she said. They pulled up to the elementary school at 3:11. Ethan got out and stood at the fence where he always stood, and at 3:15 the doors opened and a stream of kids came pouring out, and a small girl with a purple backpack spotted him and ran full speed across the yard and slammed into his legs the way she did every single day. Daddy, did you say the true things? Ethan crouched down and looked his daughter in the eye. I said all of them, Bug, every single one. Were you brave? I was scared the whole time. So yeah, I guess I was. Maddie threw her arms around his neck, satisfied. And then she noticed the woman standing a few feet back, and she pulled away and studied her with the open suspicion of an 8-year-old. "You're the lady in the fancy car." Victoria crouched down, too awkward in her expensive coat. "I am. My name's Victoria." "Are you Daddy's boss? Because Daddy said his boss told him to do the wrong thing?" The bluntness of it landed like a slap, and Victoria took it because she'd earned it. "I was," she said quietly. "And I did tell him to do the wrong thing. I was wrong, and your dad was right, and today he proved it in front of a whole lot of important people." She met the little girl's eyes. "Your dad is the bravest man I've ever met. I came here to tell him that, and to tell you." Maddie considered this with tremendous gravity. Then she looked at her father. "Is she still going to be your boss?" Ethan and Victoria looked at each other over the little girl's head, and something passed between them. Not romance. Not yet, maybe not ever, but something older and steadier. The recognition between two people who had walked through fire together and come out the other side still standing. "No, Bug," Ethan said. "I don't think anybody's going to be my boss anymore." The months that followed unfolded exactly the way months do when the truth finally gets loose in the world. The state attorney general's investigation moved fast because Eleanor Voss had handed them a case built so cleanly that all they had to do was follow the paper. Marcus Bell was indicted in 6 weeks, securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, the whole ugly stack. It came out that he'd been promised $11 million and an executive seat at Prescott the moment the deal closed, all of it contingent on the 60 acres staying hidden until the sale went through. He'd buried Ethan's safety warnings, destroyed the maintenance logs, tried to get Victoria recused, and nearly cost 40 men their lives on Line 4, all for $11 million and a title. He took a plea. 4 years. When the sentence came down, Ethan felt no triumph. Only a kind of tired sadness, because he kept thinking about the version of Marcus who'd started at the company young and hungry, before he decided that the quiet people didn't count and the small things didn't matter, and how a man could talk himself all the way down that road one reasonable-sounding step at a time, until he woke up someone he'd never meant to be. Prescott Industrial withdrew from the acquisition within the week. They had no choice once the concealed valuation became public and the regulators started asking their own questions. 2 of their executives ended up facing charges of their own. The $1.2 billion deal that was supposed to save Halstead Manufacturing evaporated overnight. And here was the twist nobody upstairs had seen coming. Though Ethan had seen it from the very first night at his kitchen table without the deal, Halstead didn't collapse. It thrived. Because the 60 acres everyone had treated as a footnote was still theirs. When the rail terminal was announced 4 months later, exactly as Ethan's friend at the planning office had predicted, that dead weight on the balance sheet became the single most valuable industrial parcel in the state, and it belonged free and clear to the company Marcus Bell had tried to sell out from under itself. Halstead didn't need to be bought. Halstead was overnight one of the most valuable companies in the region. 200 jobs that were slated to disappear stayed exactly where they were. And the men on the plant floor who'd been 3 weeks from unemployment kept their paychecks, their pensions, and their dignity, and most of them never fully understood how close they'd come to losing all of it, or that a maintenance man had stood in a boardroom in a funeral suit and saved every one of them. But some of them understood. Danny Ruiz understood. The board asked Ethan to take a leadership role, Chief of System Integrity, a title they more or less invented for him, overseeing safety and operations across the entire company, with real authority and a real seat at the table. They offered him a salary with a comma in it he'd never dreamed of, though. At that point, with his 12% stake now worth a genuine fortune, the salary was almost beside the point. Ethan sat on the offer for 3 days. Then he came back with an answer and one condition. "I'll take the job," he told Victoria and the board standing at the same glass table. "I'll oversee safety and integrity, and I'll do it right, and I'll never let what almost happened on Line 4 happen again on my watch." He paused. "But there's a condition, and it's not negotiable, and I want it written into my contract." The board leaned in, expecting a number. "Every afternoon," Ethan said. At 3 o'clock I leave. No matter what meeting is happening, no matter what deal is on the table, no matter who's in the building. At 3 o'clock, I walk out that door and I go pick up my daughter from school at 3:15. He looked around the table. There is no acquisition, no crisis, no board meeting more important than being her father. If that's a problem for anyone here, I'll keep my 12% and stay home and you can find somebody else. But that's the deal. The work matters. She matters more. I learned the hard way what happens when a person forgets which one comes first. There was a silence. And then the older board member, the one who'd laughed at the elevator, smiled and said, "Mr. Carter, I've been trying to leave work at 3 o'clock for 40 years and never once had the courage. Put it in the contract, and God help me put it in mine too." The whole table laughed, and it was written into the contract. And from that day forward, everyone at Halstead Manufacturing knew that at 3 o'clock the chief of system integrity left to pick up his little girl, and not one single person ever questioned it, because the man who'd saved the company had earned the right to decide what mattered. Victoria stood up at the next company-wide meeting in front of every employee, the executives and the floor workers, the engineers and the janitors, all of them together in one room for the first time anyone could remember. And she did the thing that was hardest for a person like her to do. She told the truth about herself in public. 3 weeks before all of this, she said, her voice steady, but her hands not quite. "I stood in a boardroom and I told a man to do it my way or leave. I called him a maintenance technician like it was an insult. I dismissed the one person in this building who understood what my father built and how to protect it because I was in a hurry and he was in my way." She looked out over the crowd until she found Ethan standing in the back where he always stood, and she held his eyes. "I was wrong. Not a little wrong. Completely wrong about the most important thing a leader can be wrong about. I thought leadership meant making people follow me. Ethan Carter taught me it means having the humility to listen before it's too late." She paused. "My father knew that. That's why he trusted this company's future to a man everyone else walked past. I spent years thinking I knew who mattered in this building. I was wrong about all of it. I'm sorry it took nearly losing everything to teach me, but I promise you, every one of you, I'll never make that mistake again." The room was silent for a moment. And then from somewhere in the back, near the plant floor crowd, Danny Ruiz started clapping, and Bobby joined him. And then the whole floor, 200 working men and women who'd nearly lost everything, and then the engineers, and then one by one, even the executives, until the whole room was on its feet, and the applause wasn't for Victoria's apology. It was for the man standing quietly in the back in a plain gray shirt who'd never asked for any of it. Ethan didn't know what to do with his face. He'd spent 17 years being invisible, and now 200 people were on their feet looking right at him. And it was, he thought, almost harder than the boardroom had been. Danny made his way over through the crowd and grabbed him by the shoulders the same way he had the day Ethan walked back in. "You did that," Danny said over the noise. "You, the quiet guy who never asked anybody for anything. You saved all of it." "We did it," Ethan said. "You pulled the logs. You found the copier record. You believed me when nobody upstairs would." "Nah." Danny shook his head and his eyes were wet, and he didn't care who saw. "I made copies. You stood up in that room. There's a difference, Ethan, and you know it." He gripped harder. Raymond picked right. "I hope he's watching. I hope he can see this." Ethan thought about the letter in his shirt pocket. He still carried it everywhere over his heart. Dirty hands built everything worth building. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think he can." That evening, Ethan and Victoria sat on the leaning front porch of his small house, while Maddie did homework at the kitchen table inside, and for a while, neither of them said anything, which was its own kind of comfortable now. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said finally. "And you can tell me it's none of my business." "Go ahead." "The money. $140 million, near enough now that the land's worth what it's worth. You could go anywhere, do anything, never work another day." She looked around at the small house, the porch that needed fixing, the mailbox that still needed painting. Why are you still here? Why take the job at all? Ethan was quiet for a moment, looking out at the street. You know what money is to a man like me, he said finally. It's not a yacht, it's not a bigger house. I don't want any of that. He nodded toward the window toward the small girl bent over her homework inside. Money is time. That's all it ever was. It's being able to leave at 3 o'clock and never worry about the paycheck. It's Maddie never fighting an insurance company for 2 years the way I fought one for her mother, because now we understand the machine and we've got the power to make it work right. He turned to look at Victoria. Raymond didn't leave me a fortune. He left me the power to protect the people I'm responsible for. 200 men on that floor. One little girl in that kitchen. That's what the money's for. That's the whole job. He shrugged. Everything else is just noise. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. My father would have said the exact same thing, she said softly. Word for word. I'm starting to understand why he trusted you more than he trusted me. She said it without bitterness, just the plain truth of someone who'd finally made peace with it. He wasn't choosing you over me, was he? He was choosing you to teach me. Maybe, Ethan said. Or maybe he just knew that someday you'd both need each other. You've got the title and the vision. I've got the floor and the memory. Neither one runs the place alone. He almost smiled. He built a company that way. 2 halves. Maybe he figured it should be led that way too. Inside, Maddie called out, Daddy, I don't know how to spell responsibility. Ethan stood up. That's a good one to learn, he called back. Come on, Bug, we'll do it together. He looked down at Victoria. You want to stay for dinner? It's grilled cheese. Corners cut off. Maddie's rules. Victoria Hayes, who had eaten in the finest restaurants in the country, thought about it for exactly 1 second. I'd love that, she said. The years went on the way years do. Halstead Manufacturing became something rare in that part of the country, a company that grew without gutting itself, that got rich off the rail terminal, without laying off a single soul, that ran a plant floor safe enough that the safety board used it as a national model. And at the center of it, in a way nobody could have predicted, 3 weeks before it all started, were 2 people who never should have ended up on the same side, a CEO who'd learned to listen, and a maintenance man who'd learned to speak up. They ran it together. Victoria out front, Ethan on the floor, and the whole place stronger for it. The board came to understand that when Ethan Carter said, a thing wasn't safe, you stopped, no matter what it cost, because the one time a company hadn't listened to him, it had nearly killed 40 men and been robbed of a fortune, and nobody was ever going to make that mistake twice. Marcus Bell served his 4 years. When he got out, he wrote Ethan a letter. Ethan never told anyone what it said, and he never answered it, but he kept it in a drawer next to Raymond's. 2 letters. 2 roads a man could walk. Ethan kept them both where he could see them as a reminder that the difference between the man who wrote the first and the man who wrote the second wasn't talent or brains or even luck. It was 1,000 small choices about whether the quiet people counted, and that a man got to make that choice fresh every single day. Maddie grew up. She never fully understood until she was much older what her father had done that gray afternoon in the boardroom, but she understood the part that mattered because she lived it every day of her childhood, that at 3 o'clock, no matter what, her dad was at the fence. Through middle school and high school, through every hard year and every good one, 3 o'clock belonged to her. And when she was 17 and writing a college essay about the person she admired most, she didn't write about a president or a hero or a name anyone would recognize. She wrote about a quiet man in a gray shirt who got told to do it their way or leave, and packed up his things and walked out, and who taught her that being brave isn't when you're not scared. Being brave is when you're scared and you do the right thing anyway. She wrote that her father had done the right thing when it cost him everything, before he ever knew it would give him everything back. And she wrote that the strongest people she'd ever known weren't the ones who talked the loudest in the room. They were the ones the room had learned too late that it should have been listening to all along. She titled the essay, "Small Things Still Count." She got into every school she applied to. And on the wall of Ethan Carter's office at Halstead Manufacturing Chief of System Integrity Corner Office he'd never asked for, there hung framed two things, and only two things. A child's crayon drawing of a stick figure man in a gray shirt in front of a big square building with a stick figure girl beside him, and above them in careful letters, "My dad fixes things." And beside it, a letter from a dead man worn soft at the edges that ended with the line he'd lived his whole life by without ever having read it. Dirty hands built everything worth building. Ethan Carter was never the loudest man in any room. He never needed to be. He walked out when they told him to do it their way or leave, and in doing so, he saved 200 families, exposed a fortune's worth of theft, honored the trust of the one man who'd truly seen him, and taught a company, and a CEO, and a little girl, and anyone who ever heard the story that the quiet ones carrying the greatest weight are exactly the ones you must never, ever underestimate. Because the man they dismissed as just a maintenance technician turned out to be the only one holding the whole thing together. And when they finally learned to see him, it wasn't his steak, or his silence, or even his courage they remembered most. It was that he was right. He was right all along, and he never once had to raise his voice to prove it.